Hi, and welcome back to I Should Have Raised Dogs, the story of my mother, my father, and America in the 20th century. I'm Keith Christensen. I was the youngest in my family, still am the youngest in my family. Somewhere, somehow, it got stuck in my head, this question of, well, how did this happen to my mom? Like, how did she get to be this way? My parents were really difficult people, and there was always this other kind of thing going on in the relationship as we were talking. My parents would just never kind of take advice from me on anything. I mean, and I don't know whether or not this is just that old guard or old school thinking of, a parent doesn't take advice from a child or whatever, but there is a point where I wish they had. Being the youngest, I was always a little bit on the outside of things, but in a way that I just didn't even understand what was going on, or people didn't explain it, and so on and so forth. But I watched. And now, I don't know what I called it back then, but now I kind of call it the metadata of a story. When you have a picture you take on your phone or something like this, yeah, you've got a picture and there's your friend's face or whatever, but that little device has tons and tons of other information attached to that picture. For me, in this case, what it looks like with the stories is I heard so many of these stories time and time again, and so I stopped listening to them. I mean, I listened, but I kind of knew how the story went. And I listened, and people would change little pieces. And that was interesting. But mostly the thing that would change or wouldn't change was them. And people get angry about the past and keep it. And it usually sounds like you don't understand, but. Like, all right, I don't understand that, but I do have some understandings. One thing's for sure, my mother's gone. Anything's wrong with me at this point is, well, it's my own fault. Or at least, that's a really useful way to think about it. Because even if my mother was here, blaming her about it, I once said to one of my relatives, I was like, look, honestly, if our mother, we're all like about 40, 50 years old now. If our mother woke up and just shot us tomorrow or did something extreme, it'd probably be more useful to try and figure out what we did wrong than to try and explain it to her. That might sound extreme, but my mother was really volatile back then, and it was hard to she just wouldn't see any reason for the longest time. And all that's over. And the stories remain, and the way people tell them changes a little. And yeah, you can hear forgiveness in somebody's voice. Yeah, you can hear when someone has decided that they're going to think about somebody that's gone differently. And as weird as it might sound, that's the good part about death, isn't it? There's an ending. That's what's at the end of the rainbow. That's where our story ends. And I think that in our entire lives, we're always kind of looking at where did this thing start? Where did this thing end? And whatever. And we come up with reasons for it. And it only makes sense when you look back. Like, oh, okay, that's happened because I guess I did that and then this and that. And well, okay, I should do that again or I shouldn't do that again. But distance sometimes gives you perspective. And I think once your parents go and you need to figure out where you are in your own memory of them and who they're going to be for you from now on. My mother was paranoid and aggressively defensive and rash and loving and thoughtful, not patient. My mother would have failed the marshmallow test at every opportunity. The marshmallow test, sorry. That's that thing they did a few years ago where they put marshmallows in front of kids and they said, you know what? If you don't eat that marshmallow, you're going to get 2 or 3 marshmallows later. And I don't know, some kids just ate the marshmallow and some kids didn't. And they made some prediction about the kids who don't eat the marshmallows. They're going to do better because they can wait and be patient. Sure. Maybe that's true, but my mother would have failed the marshmallow test, that's for sure. She just didn't have any kind of patience at all. And anything that was a crisis or anything that was a problem now, and she couldn't let go of it. And she would continue and she would kind of perseverate on it until something, until action was taken, and it was usually not a good idea. I think that's one of the parts of my mother's life that my father took over kind of completely. I mean, my mother had a plan, to get out of Brooklyn, to help her family get out of Brooklyn, to help her family and her brothers and sisters be safe, to earn enough money to get married, to get out on her own, to have kids, to have a family, that whole suburban family package. But she was really rash. And yet I think she was always trying to come from a good place. She just didn't know where that good place was. And I think that she was trying to protect and defend people. And when she was young, there were legitimate concerns and legitimate threats that kids growing up more or less on their own, while their mom was off at work, and, growing up poor in the Great Depression and not having a father figure and all of the things that my mother felt like she had to defend herself against. I mean, even her last name, she had such a problem with. I may have mentioned this earlier, but like Zeev. Now, going to school in the 1940s had a strict alphabetical, right? Was something my mother talked about a lot. Like she loved school, and then she hated school. She started out, and you could see it in her report cards. She started out like doing well and had all these. And then over the years, especially as she gets towards leaving, and she gets towards, she moved from school to school to school. My mother went through at least 5 schools during the time that she was growing up, and she hated that kind of change. And in time, it got exaggerated, maybe. Like that was a real threat that my mother grew up with, but that wasn't a real threat that I grew up with. It's amazing to me when I think about it, but I went to the same series of schools. I went to the same schools that I think my brother and sister did. Went to the same high school, same small town, same small thing. My mother and father had made it happen. And I think that's a thing to be proud of, and I think that's a thing that they planned on and they changed. But as time went on, my mother sort of backed off more and more. And I think she had less control, and I think it was always very unclear exactly what my father and mother would do in the relationship, but pretty much all the family stuff was mostly left to her. I've said it probably somewhere before that some of the worst things happen because of some of the best reasons. My mother's volatility and just, wow, so many screaming arguments with children. Me too. That I was always going to lose. But I don't remember what any of those arguments were about and how many conflicts there were. And I don't remember what any of those were about. I only remember all kinds of yelling. And I like to look back and think that somewhere she saw a threat. There was still this thing that she wanted to defend us from. And that reaction and that fear and that worry, and that after everything else had gone, that's what stayed. And I try and look back and I think, well, what's the metadata there? What's the stuff that my mother was afraid of or angry about? What was that behind that? I don't think about these things all the time. I do truly think that she did all right. But I just don't think she ever knew how she did, actually. I keep forgetting to do this. So, hey, thank you for watching, and please hit the little like button. Please leave comments. I love to hear It's really just nice to know where people are coming from. And oh, hit the little bell for alerts and notifications. There's so many little pieces of work to do with this, but press those buttons once and then things will just come to you, right? Thanks so much. See you soon.